of the registered voters in Sarasota County that came out to vote, 15.63. Which had 77% approval rating, but that's 16% of the population of the voting public. In the 2006 election, so it has decreased, it was 24.58%. Again, still a a special election. The general election for the Sarasota Soil and Water Group 3 had 42.59% show up and vote on it. Constitutional Amendment 3 in 2014, 54.45% voted on it. County Charter Amendment 2006 General, 53.31% are voting on these. And you're talking about things that probably most people didn't even know about. I can bet you if you talk to members in this community, they are very familiar with the referendum. They're very familiar with the impact that it has on our schools. And again, to me, I feel that maybe it's just comfortable because that's the way it's always been. So I encourage you to take a moment and step out of it and look at the cost that it does, in fact, cost this district. And also, I think it undermines the credibility. I think it looks like it's purposefully put on a special election because you want to manipulate the outcome. And I think that is disappointing because I believe that voters are very aware of the impact and they can make that decision on themselves.
The voters are here in March. Whether they choose to come out and vote, that's not our problem. So the voters are here. It's not that we're trying to do it in July when nobody would be around. We're doing it around in March when there are still people around. All the snow people are still here. They don't leave yet. Which one of you want next? You, Shirley?
I think next.
Well, I think what we have in front of us now is the language for the March 18 referendum, and I think we all agree we have to do that. There's some discussion on whether we want 3 years or 4 years, but I think a discussion can come up in whether or not we have an election in November 2020. I think that's a different election. That's a different discussion than what we should be having right now. Right now is the discussion for March of 2018. If we want to have a later discussion on November of 2020, I think we should have another discussion in November of 2020. Or not in November, but prior to November of 2020. But the discussion today has to be the March 18th.
So there are three questions that we're going to seek to get answered today. Number one is, do you wish to seek renewal of the referendum? The second question, do you want to peel it back? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can't vote. We're in a workshop.
We're not voting.
But we need to give some direction. I think that direction is clear. The second question that has to be answered is when to seek renewal. I had a conversation less than an hour and a half ago. I apologize, I had to step out, but I was speaking with the supervisor of elections. There are 3 potential dates to hold the referendum. We have previously discussed a March 13th date. Mr. Turner's preference would be that we not use the March 13th date, although he would honor our request if that were the case. His preference would be that we move to March 20th because that gives him significant space between the District 72 election on February 13th. He is concerned that if we stayed on a March 13th date, that ballots would be sent to people prior to the 13th, and they would actually have 2 ballots in their possession. If we waited till March 30th, he would actually mail the ballot for this on February 13th. So with the exception of military and overseas ballots, no one would be in possession of 2 ballots at any one time. The third date that is in play is the February 13th date. It would require us to accelerate our efforts, and he said, quote, I'd have to know pretty quick that you wanted to go on February 13th, but there's the opportunity to piggyback on the District 72. So the 3 options of seeking renewal: February 13th, March 13th, or March 20th.
When is the long vote election?
March 20th.
That has not been decided. His advice to them, they have to go within the month of March. his advice to them would be the same as his advice to us, which is to do the March 30th, but Longboat Key
March
has
30th or 20th?
20th, thank you, the 20th of March, but they have not decided.
I'm not understanding why March 13th would require 2 ballots.
Because people can absentee ballots 30 days before the election.
Correct. The February 13th ballot item, they would actually receive their ballot for March 13th prior to mailing in many cases.
It's the Buchanan race.
Oh, the Buchanan race.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I wasn't thinking about that.
Correct.
So from my perspective, piggybacking on what the superintendent has said, as the person who's going to be the scrivener of this resolution, there are 3 things that I need answered to give you something. When? Obviously, you just got those 3 dates. How much? I'm assuming that's 1 mil, but I need to know that. And then last, how long? And that's obviously 3 or 4 years. So that's the feedback I need in order to give you a draft resolution to vote on, especially if you're going to go with February, sooner rather than later. Because recall, our resolution is to direct the Board of County Commission to call an election. Those are the words of the statute. So we need to give them, in fairness, some time to get it on their agenda. And what the supervisor had told me when we were, before there was any February election, when we were looking at March, he needed the ballot language by December 15th. I'm assuming if we're talking, because then we were talking about March 13th, if we're talking about February 13th as a possibility, I assume that would bump that up a month as well, so he would need that in November.
Do you want to go?
Both of you came up first.
I just want to know the cost because that's obviously going to be a big. So has he indicated the cost? Because as some would be married up, if we did the 13th of February, that's being married up with another election going on. So
I asked for that information. Maybe the superintendent has something, but the last word I heard from Mr. Turner was yesterday, and he was still working on that. Maybe he has worked on that.
So specific to the February 13th date, I made an incorrect assumption that with a third of Sarasota County voting on District 72, that the cost of our election would be cut in a third. His response was that would not be the case, that you would have to half the cost of that third that's already, you don't get a free ride because the state has called an election for a third of the county. And so you would, for that 1/3 of the county, the state and the school district would split the cost of staging an election in District 72. So you would have to split the cost for District 72 and bear the full cost. And so the cost would ultimately be reduced by about 1/6, is that you get half of the third as a savings for going for February 13th. Did you check my math on that? Yeah. Okay.
and we're talking about. So you said 86%, or is that what you said?
13% was at 6 or 13.
So then, but of what? So what's that final dollar amount?
25, right?
Well, it's I've seen various. Some are 400,000, some are 325, some have been 375. So that's what I want to know.
But I would think that the cost of the February election would increase somewhat because they're probably going to have more early voting, and there's probably going to be more cost involved in that election.
But we wouldn't be responsible.
Well, we'd be responsible for 1/6 of whatever, or 1/2 of whatever the cost was for that February election.
Why would that
area
be different than a municipal election?
Well, I know last time, almost 4 years ago, we had, when we were the only thing on the ballot with the town of Longboat Key, we had some input on how much early voting we wanted to pay for.
Okay.
And I believe, I could be wrong about it, but I believe we picked like a week.
No, we did 2 weeks.
Did we do 2 weeks?
We did the maximum, and that's why it cost so much. It cost about $285,000. We gave them a check for $300,000 because you had to pay up front, and they gave us back about 15.
So I think it's fair to estimate that if you went in February, you'd be saving a little bit of money, but not the bulk of it, obviously. So it's interesting. I'm sure that's all right, but it's interesting.
I want to
know why we pay.
I don't think we should
Anyway.
go out in February.
No free ride, he said.
I do not think we should go out in February. I
Yeah.
think we should go with Longboat Key. Whatever date Longboat Key uses, that's the date we should go with.
That was the question that Bridget had was the same one I did. What's the cost savings? And when it's not a third, when it's only a sixth, it doesn't seem to make. And I agree that maybe we ought to look at shortening that early voting. That's where we can save some money. Do the early voting and then the absentee voting.
You know, many people now are doing absentee, and it was like 48% of a recent.
She had her hand up before.
Well, my issue. I understand that the savings 13%. It's almost my issue is the confusion. I would hate for somebody to say, "Oh no, I'll get a dirty little secret. You know, I went unopposed. You know how many people come up to me and say I voted for you, and I just say thank you. I let them off the hook. I'm afraid that people are going to think I already voted for the referendum. I don't want a third of the population to think I've already voted. And so when you're going out trying to get people to go out and vote, and they think, oh, I already sent my absentee ballot in. And so we run the risk of creating confusion to people of saying, I've already voted. And the Longboat Keys are, no offense to Murray, it's a very small group of people. And so the chance, and that they're going to vote afterwards. So there's a very strong chance that you may have people who say, I've already voted. Same group of people who tell me that, hey, Eric, I voted for you. So I'm worried about the confusion of people.
I'm not worried about the confusion. The referendum is well established, March every 4 years. You talk to anybody out in the community, they will tell you, are you having the referendum this March? I mean, they know. We've been doing it long enough now that the community is comfortable and aware that the, except for a few groups of people, the majority of the people as a whole are very supportive of education and of our school district and of the referendum. So I'm for going whenever the Longboat Key goes. So if you can figure that out, that's what I would like to do. And I see yes from Jane and Shirley.
And we don't have final dollars amount. We're not going to make, that's not going to be part of the decision at all? Dollars incurred?
No.
Nope, not important. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't say it's not important. We know it's going to be less than 300,000. You know, 285,000 last time. We're going to reduce the costs by not having the extra week of early voting. So we'll ballpark it at 250.
And can anybody tell me the return on investment? If we do it in,
It'd be infinity if it was in November.
if we do it in March,
230 million and 250,000.
and we get 58,000 a year, so that's for 4 years, 58,000. So if she's been in.
Every year.
Yes, I'm at 58.
It's a lot.
I know, Shirley.
I think I caution the return on investment language, and I am a big advocate of that word.
I know you are.
terminology.
That's why I'm using it.
But this is where it's problematic. You are putting something out to a referendum for voters who are in fact taxed and feed into the district where we are elected to oversee their money. So giving them a return on investment would be having a large amount of people participating and giving their feedback, determining how we would be spending that money or whether or not they would be assessing a tax.
Historically, when people talk about ROI, they use it in comparison to a project with the same level of risk level. So typically when people talk about ROI, they're saying, if I put my money in this investment versus that investment. So it's usually used as a comparative tool. And that can change over time. So ROI in a high inflationary time would need to be higher than an ROI now. ROI for something that's high risk, it would have to be higher than something that's low risk. So saying ROI in isolation, I would think isn't really using the terminology in the way it was meant to be.
2 short questions, and then we have to close down because they have to tear this down and set us up there. So, Jane?
I just say that we all need to be as positive as we possibly can. Whatever we do and go forward with, we need to be positive. Sometimes I win, sometimes you win, sometimes we all win, and this is a winner for everyone.
Art, do you have 2 more questions for us?
I believe your next question regarded was
The next, what I'm hearing, and of course, all I'm going to do is provide something to you which can be changed any way you want to do it, but I'd like to try to get it as right as I can the first time. So what I've heard is, my first question was when, and but the draft I'm going to be giving you is March 20th. That obviously can be changed. How much? Unless I hear otherwise, I'm assuming that's $1 million.
$1 million.
And then how long? That's the 3 or 4 years.
4 years.
From what I'm hearing, I'm going to do the draft for 4 years. Again, obviously, that's subject to coming to the board and getting amended. So I will prepare a resolution which will look very much like the ones that I gave you from the last 3 times, with the date of March 20th, with $1 million, and for 4 years. Recognizing that at the board table, that's what will be advertised. You all can amend that if you see fit. And I will have that done tomorrow so that it can be on your next board agenda unless you tell me otherwise. That gives the county commission as much time as possible.
I think that's good. Yes, Shirley. I need to see you, Shirley. I need to see you say yes.
I can't say yes, can I?
Oh, you can.
That is what I will give you. You can do with it what you will.
Okay.
For what it's worth, exactly what he said is what the advisory committee recommended.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. If the workshop is over, we will re-adjourn and not re-adjourn,
convened at 3 o'clock.
we will reconvene at 3 o'clock meeting here.